We are going to start the resistance report this week in Rafah, as we have for the last couple weeks, despite a break from Rafah for a number of months. The battle is raging in Rafah and in the north in Jabalia. And as Nora said on the news, that the Israelis are attacking all over Gaza. There's no safe place in Gaza. There's been attacks in Rafah, Khan Yunis, Maghazi, and the middle camps, and Nusrat. And of course, the ethnic cleansing in Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia and in the Jabalia camp has carried on apace. But the main battlefields are in Rafah and Jabalia. So we will start with there. We'll just focus in on Rafah, as we always do. I just wanted to bring a note that there was prisoner exchange talks this week that happened, notably a delegation under the leadership of Khalil al-Hayya, who is the senior most leader of Hamas, and he's the de facto head of the negotiations committee. Him and a technical team were in Cairo exchanging names for a prisoner exchange, which is quite an advanced stage of negotiations that haven't happened in months. And I only bring that up because both sides mentioned it, and you can sort of look for the reason. So the Israelis said that it was Trump. I think that's not relevant for Palestinians whose demands have remained the same, and the people who are on this initial list that is being exchanged, as I've pointed out on this show for 14 months, are names that could have been released on the 8th of October. And we know from the prisoners who were released earlier that's what they were told. They were told they would be released in a day or two. Yahya Sinwar met them in Gaza on October 7th and told them that it was just a matter of facilitating their release with the Israelis. And the Israeli prisoners themselves believed that the Israeli army was just taking a day or two to collect itself after its stunning defeat and collapse during the raid on October 7th. But that never happened. Israel has not been negotiating to release their captives, other than the one release in November of last year. These prisoners have been held without these negotiations listing names, which is a key part of the negotiation. But these names are civilian names that could have been released right away. And in many cases, they're not held by 𝐓𝐡𝐞, as we've talked about before as well. They're held by other groups, or were given to other groups by freelancers or criminal elements or other groups. They were not part of the 𝐓𝐡𝐞 raid, and they're not in 𝐓𝐡𝐞's care. In many cases, they were brought across the border and handed over to 𝐓𝐡𝐞 because people didn't know what to do with them, and 𝐓𝐡𝐞 took them and has looked after them since then. And so this is an interesting development, something to take note of. Also, there's discussions about the community support committee, which is essentially another way of describing a national unity government that would rule over Gaza after the ceasefire, which again matches with Yahya Sinwar's political praxis. He has been pro-reconciliation since the moment he arrived back in Gaza, and was so while the leader of the prisoners in prison. And so these two developments, I think, are notable and are worth keeping our eye on. The ceasefire negotiations have been a ploy, as we know, and not real. But these two elements are something to keep an eye on. So I will continue to keep an eye on those discussions. So also, just to note, Tel al-Hawa is where Yahya Sinwar was killed on the 16th of October, and he was killed meeting with commanders from the Rafah Brigade, who Israel declared in late August, early September, were eliminated. They didn't exist anymore. Then we saw Sinwar meeting with those commanders in battle fatigues on the day that he was killed. And now, some weeks later, 6 weeks later, the operations in Rafah have intensified. In fact, this week there was 30 operations in Rafah, in an area that has been ethnically cleansed of civilians, but fighters remain from all factions. There was field reports from all factions of the battle in Rafah. And so we're going to take a look at that today. And I brought you, we'll take a look at number one here tomorrow. I brought you this video last week. This is an abridged version of it. But this is Operation Avenging Sinwar. There's 3-part operation. This is the first from November 22nd. And we have the commander here explaining that after the movement and behavior, monitoring the behavior of enemy forces, the decision was made by the command of the Eastern Battalion to prepare and equip a series of tight ambushes in the operational area, which you're seeing there on the map up top. Right there, you see the Philadelphia corridor, that's in green, and the routes that the Israeli military take into the center of Gaza. That is the purpose of the Philadelphia corridor, and the reason why Israel doesn't want to release or doesn't want to withdraw from that area, which is what has prevented the prisoner exchange up until this point, because 𝐓𝐡𝐞 demands an end to the war, an end to the aggression, and a withdrawal of Israeli troops, which incidentally is exactly what the Americans said that they believed in too. So you can see this was the first video. I broke down each part of this last week. I won't do that again this week, so you can check out last week's for the detailed version. But what we have here is a 3-part, it's actually a 4-part ambush, but it's the first time that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has named the operatives that took part. So that's Hussam with the sniper, with the Al-Ghul sniper rifle. It's Khalid's unit that has the Yassin archers squad. And then Walid is the cutoff man on this operation. This was Operation Avenging Sinwar Part 1. This is the movement of the vehicles exactly from the Philadelphia corridor into the neighborhood that was prepared. This is the Al-Junaynah neighborhood in eastern Rafah, Al-Junaynah camp. All of Rafah neighborhoods are camps. Mostly all of the neighborhoods are refugee camps, but it's organized under one camp. So it's called Rafah camp, but it's broken down into a number of smaller camps, just a byproduct of the time in the 1950s when these camps were established. Most of the camps in the rest of Gaza have their own names and operate independently, but in Rafah they're all together. So this operation is from a brigade, the Rafah Brigade, the Eastern Battalion in particular, that was told they didn't exist. So we're watching here an F7 attack on these 7 soldiers. I calculated last week that this was 200 meters, this shot, which was a remarkable shot for the first stage of Operation Avenging Sinwar. Also worth noting, we can go to number 2 when this one's done tomorrow. It was important to note also just that Army Radio reported on the death of a tank platoon commander from the 401st Armored Division a couple days ago, killed by anti-tank fire. There's the medevac helicopter announcing Part 2. And so this is Part 2, the setup. The commander speaking on a closed line. Again, critical. He's watching CCTV footage on the laptop. He says the conditions on our end are good. This is Part 2. As he's watching on the CCTV footage, he says, here they are. They are trying to advance towards the building, and we will deal with them according to plan, ambush number 2. And that's what it says on the sign on the wall beside him there. You can see the closed line. Again, the closed line is mission critical for the resistance. This is a sealed, clean line that the resistance has from the tunnels up to above ground that the Israelis cannot get at because of a counterintelligence operation that 𝐓𝐡𝐞 foiled by the Israelis, foiled and unraveled, which prevented the Israelis from tapping into this closed line. And now, 14 months into this war, we still see these lines playing a critical role, with the commander able to command troops who are also above ground, watching on that, listening on that closed line. It's a huge asset for the resistance, and it's a product of Yahya Sinwar's leadership and the preparation and being on top of it in the way that 𝐓𝐡𝐞's counterintelligence was in the 2018 era. So let's look at number 3. Again, we're in the Al-Junaynah area. This is the east of the camp. We have Operation Avenging Sinwar. So this is the next day. It's a series of operations that we're looking at. The spotter here is commenting on the audio track that we removed, that the Israeli military has entered the building. You see fighters mouse holing again through walls. They're never out in the streets. We never see them out in the streets. I have pixelated this picture of the soldiers heading into the building to meet YouTube's community guideline standards, which we do impeccably. And this is an F-7 strike on the Israeli troop position. But you're going to watch the fighter after he launches here. He's going to turn back into the living room and he's going to ask for the 105. He says, "Give me the 105." And you see he's got his ammo man ready, passes him the 105. This is a good shot of how easy it is to load this weapon and how useful it is in the urban combat. He loads it up, and that's a Puma engineering vehicle with a demining claw on the front. That's going to get hit from an elevated firing position. So they fire on the troop position first before the armored vehicle, so that the troop position doesn't fire back on you. And that resistance operation is very successful. When that operation was happening, just as he's firing, you can hear multiple gunshots because there's shooters in that as well. And that was a 𝐓𝐡𝐞 built thermobaric warhead. I've talked about that before. I'll talk about it more again, but this is a uniquely 𝐓𝐡𝐞 build for the thermobaric warhead, and they use that on that building as part of Operation Avenging Sinwar Part 2. And this next video, this is the same operation. They're going to target a D9 from point blank range, D9 armored bulldozer by Caterpillar, of course. Built in Peoria, Illinois, in the United States, getting hit from extremely close distance from a weapon that does very significant destruction to that slat armor on the D9 bulldozer. There we have the spotter and cameraman there. You can see his dual function. It's not just a paparazzi running around with the troops. The cameraman is a spotter, and you're going to see here he becomes a gunman as well. So we have 3 shooters here firing on the Israeli position. And this audio doesn't have the audio in it, but there's no return fire after the first burst. So the soldiers went quiet in this scene, which might lead to the medevac helicopter that we see that's coming in here. And in the audio track of this, which you can find on my Twitter, maybe tomorrow I can throw that up if people want to hear these videos are very lightly edited, but they're edited for YouTube community guidelines specifics. But that helicopter is so close that you can hear it. And again, just showing, I know I get a lot of comments, and I probably will on the comment show, why they don't target those helicopters, but they don't. And that helicopter was close enough to target with an 𝐓𝐴 by a significant margin, but they have been consistent about not targeting the evacuation of wounded soldiers, which is an Islamic principle of Islamic warfare that goes back 1,500 years or so. And many people I know are frustrated by that, but the fighters have stuck with that discipline, and we have not seen any instance at all in the 14 months. We've seen many medevac helicopters, thousands of them, not being fired upon at all. Let's look at number 5, because this is Operation Avenging Sinwar Part 3. Same neighborhood. You can see all 3 of the operations there. We're now into the 3rd operation. Despite the intensity of the aerial bombardment and artillery in the Al Junaina neighborhood, after the execution of the 1st and 2nd ambushes, the fighters could only wait for the ambush of the enemy towards the killing zone for the 3rd part. And this is the 1st round here. We're going to see, you can see the 105 shell there in the upper left corner coming in. It's a pretty good shot of it. And again, hitting the bulldozer. That bulldozer hopes it's an automatic bulldozer. 𝐓𝐴 has made a system to make these bulldozers automatic. That would be the only way that there would be survivability from that kind of a strike, from an elevated firing position, downward angle on the slat armor. This is not tank armor on the D9s, it's slat armor. So you'll see the angle of this if you look in the upper left corner of this video that we're watching right now of a D9 armored bulldozer. The angle of that weapon is devastating, and we've seen that throughout the war, that the fighters are picking that spot. There's no indications, still no indications of a shortage of weaponry. They're still using appropriate weapons. If anything, that's overuse of that weapon. That's overkill, because that's a tandem charge warhead that's used for rolled homogeneous armor and not slat armor. So it's a devastating hit. Number 6 is also part of this operation. I have pixel masked the 2 troops here, but they're poking their heads out of their Puma engineering vehicle, and we're seeing here a point blank shot at that vehicle. There's twin vehicles. There's 2 side by side. The soldiers were, one was outside of the tank, and one was had his helmet on facing forward. The one in the foreground was having a cigarette, clearly believing that the area was clear of fighters, although that doesn't match with the reporting of the Israeli soldiers, who said that all throughout in Rafah they have been chased, tracked, and attacked, especially in this last month. So we can go to number 7, because this is still part of the same operation. This is a thermobaric warhead, and again, you can see there, you can see the thermobaric warhead. That was just we just saw the rocket booster of it. But 𝐓𝐡𝐞 has built a tandem charge thermobaric warhead. You can see a soldier there. I pixelated him out. They're going to move up into a firing position on this soldier. Again, we're still in the eastern neighborhood of Rafah, and like I said, there was 30 operations that don't include these ones in the last week, so probably we're going to see a bunch of those on the show next week. The spotter in there said, "Did you see them?" Moving into position. And this next one, number 8, the commander comes into the room where these fighters are, and he asks the guys how the morale is. You can see the Merkava tank moving in. Here he asks, he's putting the rocket booster on the Yasin 105, and the commander says, "How's the morale, guys?" And they all go, "High. Morale's high." And then you can see them moving into position there. One guy holds the weapon, and one guy holds the ammunition. We see a D9 armored bulldozer, again getting a Yasin strike. In this one, there was a tank. This set, when they set off after saying, "How's morale?" Morale's high. They go out and they hit a D9. This is the first one. They hit a D9. You can see the tank there. That's him with the rocket booster, and he looks up and says, "Morale's good." That you can see the squad moving into position from there. Again, 3-man squad. That's the biggest we ever see. Sometimes we see 2 squads that will give you 6, but we never see large groupings. They fight guerrilla tactics impeccably, and have throughout the war. Even these new fighters, if they're new fighters, are being trained that way. So if we look at the next one tomorrow, because these same guys are operating here after they left the building saying morale is high, they hit a tank. So they hit the D9, then they hit the Merkava tank, and then they're going to hit the Namr troop carrier. So that's the complete set of primary Israeli armored vehicles. Again, in the Al Janina neighborhood. There's the Namr, the troop carrier, holding 12 guys, getting a Yasin strike from an elevated firing position, which means it's coming down on top of the armor, which effectively operates like a top attack helicopter. And this is the commander that we saw in the first video, and he's saying, "We have prepared ambushes for them beyond what they have expected. We have demonstrated what we mean, and not just let them hear what we say. We demonstrated what we mean. Indeed, it is jihad of victory or martyrdom from the martyr Izzeldin al-Qassam brigade." So remarkable operation, series of operations there in Rafah. And when you think about these operations in Rafah, we remember that Yahya Sinwar was there meeting with those commanders before. And so there's this piece of the story that we learned by Sinwar being there meeting the commanders that hangs over all of these operations. And the operations that came before that, because Sinwar was clearly not in a tunnel managing the battle from a tunnel. He was out with his fighters in the most dangerous place, in a place that had been completely ethnically cleansed. The population of Rafah was gone. By the middle of May, there was no civilians left in Rafah, and that is still the case. Nobody has returned to Rafah. So this is a pure battle space, ethnic cleansing that Israel is carrying out, and fighters are still there, able to target them in this comprehensive way. This week alone in Rafah, 30 operations, 9 Yasin strikes versus tanks, 4 Yasin strikes versus APCs, 5 Yasin strikes versus D9s. That's not what you just saw on camera there. These will be on videos coming up. Shawad EFPs versus 6 tanks and 4 troop carriers. We don't get videos of every operation. We know it's only a fraction of the operations, but these are not, what I'm giving you, these counts here are not from the videos you just saw. These are videos. The videos were from before, and the count is from this week. It often can take a few days for videos to get out in certain cases. It was also a television IED, an anti-personnel IED set off against troops, daily mortar strikes in Rafah. And of note, several of the resistance factions have joined the battle in Rafah, which was primarily 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿 and 𝐄𝐫𝐶 up until now. So it was interesting to note in the field reports this week, Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade's operations, DFLP and PFLP operations happening in Rafah. So very interesting developments on the resistance front. And while eyes were on Syria this week, the resistance has carried on the battle against the ethnic cleansing and genocide that's happening in Gaza. Let's look at number 10. This is interesting because this video was able to come out in the same day. This is 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿 also using the closed line because they benefit from the clean line as well. So you have the commander here operating, and he says on the phone that he points out where the gatherings of vehicles are, and he says the morale of our men is high. So multiple factions talking about the morale of their men 14 months on. This sign says, a year and 2 months after October 7th, 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿 is still in the field. He's saying to the Israelis, don't think if, think when we'll get you. And that second sign says, during the glorious battle of Al-Aqsa flood, 425 days, and we're still fighting. And they say, Netanyahu, do you remember the 16th of July? The attempt to assassinate you at the Rafah crossing with our barrage of 81 millimeter mortar shells. So this was obviously the same unit that carried out that operation when Netanyahu was at the Philadelphia corridor doing his Philadelphia corridor photo ops that happened just before he made the announcement that the Israelis intended to not give back the Philadelphia corridor. And so that's an interesting development. 𝐓𝐴 𝐄𝐿 also communicating through resistance operations, communicating previous operations and reminding Netanyahu of that event from back in July. So that is the battle in Rafah from this week. We also have a battle in Jabalia, of course, where Nora described the ethnic cleansing in brutal detail. The Netzarim corridor still do not have people from the north traveling through the Netzarim corridor. They are being displaced in the north, but they are not leaving to the south. They are displaced into Gaza City. They're being completely ethnically cleansed from Beit Hanun. Beit Lahia should be on that map in the upper left corner, directly adjacent to Beit Hanun. Jabalia camp is north of Jabalia al-Balad, the city. So this is the focus of the area. The Israelis are pushing in their genocide from the east and destroying and emptying the shelters. Also just wanted to note about Jabalia this week. Sunday was the anniversary, the 37th anniversary of the outbreak of the First Intifada that began in the Jabalia camp. The First Intifada, the Intifada of the Stones, began in the Jabalia camp, so a history to reflect on. I just want to bring in a report from Army Radio from December 5th. Army Radio talking about the ethnic cleansing in Jabalia. They're perfectly aware of what's going on, and they put it out on the radio. They said about 18,000 Gazan citizens have been evacuated in the last day. That was the death march that Nora talked about, and Hossam Shabbat wrote about. He's one of the journalists that remains in the north, wrote about that death march. About 18,000 Gazan citizens evacuated in the last day from Beit Lahia area through a safe crossing. This is Israeli Army radio language. It's obviously not a safe crossing. It's an insanely dangerous crossing where people are shot dead and other people are pulled out and sent to torture camps where they, in many cases, are being tortured to death in camps in southern Israel. But this is the words of the Israeli Army Radio. Through a safe crossing established by the 162nd Division, this population, Army Radio said, is several times larger than the number of people the IDF estimated still remained in the area and that they had evacuated from shelters. So the IDF's going around burning shelters, burning the schools, and pushing people on death marches out of the north. And they're still saying on the 5th of December, 2 months into this operation, that there's more people than they expected. They thought they had ethnically cleansed the population. They're not, but they've arrested, according to them, 1,300 people. And there's more than 90,000 people evacuated from Beit Hanun and Beit Lahia. Just brutal crime that the world has watched day by day for now more than 60 days take place in Jabalia. This is the third major invasion of Jabalia. We'll remember back that the Israelis said they had operational control over Jabalia in December of 2023. They reinvaded in May and flattened the place, the camp again in May, achieved nothing but destruction with that. And now they're back for a 2-month operation that they planned to stay for many more months. I reported that a week or two ago from Army Radio, that their intention is to stay for many months in Jabalia. This operation is not going to end in the next day or two. They intend to stay there because that is the only way that the Israelis see to pull a victory out of the defeat and failure of all of their strategic goals in Gaza, is to carry out an ethnic cleansing, to shrink the size of the Gaza Strip, and to keep people constantly on the move. Yedioth Ahronoth, the Hebrew newspaper, pointed out that Hamas has not surrendered in Jabalia yet. That was in their article 2 days ago. Hamas has not surrendered in Jabalia yet. Hamas is not going to surrender in Jabalia, and neither are the civilian population in Jabalia going to surrender. They should know that at this point. Hamas has, according to Yedioth Ahronoth, military sources, consistently succeeded in tracking and trailing Israeli forces throughout Jabalia. They've killed more than 40 soldiers, including the commander of the 401st Brigade. Armored Brigade. So they are well aware of what is happening in Jabalia. And just a couple days ago, an incident took place, according to Army Radio, early in the morning. Fighters from the Qassam brigades that were guarding the Jabalia area hit a truck full of soldiers who were about to leave Gaza. They were on their way out after 2 months of ethnic cleansing, killing civilians, killing thousands of civilians. 3,000 is the number that we're at now. And again, the counting is very difficult because the hospitals themselves are being dismantled. The shelters are dismantled, so we don't know where people are going. People are scattered around, but the number is 3,000 killed at this point that we know. And these soldiers were killed as they were, the Army Radio noted, on their way out for refreshment from the operation. They were hit by anti-tank fire and anti-tank guns, which is, I suppose they're referring to an Al-Ghul there, killed 3 soldiers, 18 were wounded on their way out. And that unit had posted on social media a party picture inside the house of someone in Jabalia, talking about how they were going to be done, how they were done, and get excited about going home. Okay, let's look at number 11. Number 11 is an operation burying an IED. Again, you can see the utility from the Israeli military of making these roads dirt. We see a 𝐄𝐥𝐿 EFP. This is a large, like a triple-sized 𝐄𝐥𝐿 EFP being buried, and the fighters, you can see the cord running to it there for it to be detonated by hand. The fighter's going to lie down and say, "Listen, here I am." He's talking to Israel, and I am, and we are the men. We come and advance to. If you are men, come and advance towards us, because we are men of the brigade of Abu Anas al-Gandour. And Ahmed Gandour is the chief of the Northern Division. You can see the tank move in over that IED and blows the tank up, such that the wheels are blown off, the tracks are blown off, and the camera, you can see there, the wheels of the tank are completely off on that shot. But they say, the fighters say, "We will avenge you, O Abu Anas." And Anas Gandour was a senior leader in the Qassam brigades. He was the target of the first 2,000-pound bomb, apocalyptic bombs, where they drop 6 apocalyptic bombs, that what we came to know from the Nasrallah assassination in Lebanon. But that was the first example of it in Jabalia, when they carried out that the execution, the assassination of Ahmed Gandour, and they killed hundreds of civilians in attempting to do that. And Gandour was a close aide to Adnan al-Ghul and to Ahmed Jabari and Mohammed al-Daif. He's the senior commander. His family was killed in 2014. He's from Jabalia camp. His family was killed in an airstrike on him, on his house in 2014. If we look at number 12, all 3 of these operations are dedicated to Abu Anas Gandour. So number 12 is a Yasin 105 strike from an elevated firing position. And Gandour was the leader of the Jabalia battalion at the time when Israel invaded in 2004, just before the pullout, just before they left Gaza. So he's been a commander for a long time within the organization, and his fighters are all over this battle. If we look at number 13, we have a booby-trapped house. The Israeli military said that there was 300 booby-trapped houses. The fighters booby-trap the houses once they see which pattern the Israeli military moves down. You can see their triangles there. Army radio reported 300 booby-trapped houses last week that they had encountered. The fighters are talking here, identifying it, and setting off that explosion. The fighter after says the mission was successful. The soldiers were killed. Now look at number 14 here. This is an interesting one, because this is the first time in the war that we have seen the RPG-29 Vampire. That's what we're looking at here. It fires a similar warhead to a Yasin 105, but as you can see, it takes a 2-man team to operate it. And the round itself has a rocket motor that allows for better accuracy and longer distance of the Yasin 105 shell. So here we're seeing it being used to devastating effect in Jabalia during this battle, and this is also dedicated to Abu Anas. The RPG-29 is notable for from the Battle of Wadi Hajar in 2006. Hezbollah used these to great effect in 2006. We can maybe just loop it around tomorrow. They used it in 2006 in Wadi Hajar, which became the graveyard of the Merkava. And of course, the RPG-29 was used in Gaza very famously, just down the road from Rafah in Shujaiya in 2014. This was the weapon that was used against the Golani Brigade troop carrier that destroyed the troop carrier and killed all of its occupants, that effectively ended the ground invasion in the 2014 war. Israel lost the stomach to fight after they went into Shujaiya. And the ghosts of Shujaiya are what haunted them for the decade between that battle and starting this war after October 7th. And many people thought Shujaiya would be the first place the Israelis went in this war, but it was not. They did not want to go to Shujaiya at first. But previous wars, as Rafat always talked about, because of its proximity to the border, the Israelis would invade Shujaiya first, and when they did that in 2014, they were hit with an RPG-29, and you can see that there. You can see the difference between the rocket motor on the back, and the reason that we haven't seen many of these is because to create the rocket motor is a different type of manufacturing process than to create the booster charge of the Yasin 105. But you can see by the warhead that it's a Yasin 105. What the RPG-29 does is it gives you better aim and better distance. So you can shoot from further back. But as you can see, it's pretty cumbersome. It's a 2-man crew to operate it. And so that's the reason why we don't see those in battle very often in Gaza, because the resistance has made a decision to focus on the lightweight RPG launcher, the Yasin launcher, and firing these same munitions from closer that don't require using these heavier systems that are harder to move and move quickly through. So RPG 29 for Ahmed Gandour, in salute to him. Resistance in Rafah, in salute to Yahya Sinwar. So the fighters are referring back to their fallen commanders. And that is the resistance report for this week from Gaza. And we are going to talk more in the coming moments when we have Helena back about Syria, and a quick update on Lebanon. There's continuous, in week 2 now of the ceasefire, continuous ceasefire violations. Israel announced there's been more than 200 strikes since the ceasefire went into effect. So they're doubling the number every week. And 4 Israeli reserve soldiers were killed in a booby trap. They said it was a booby trap, but now the investigation is revealing it, that they died when their own munitions exploded on them while they were carrying munitions that they're not supposed to be doing, to continue blowing up places in Lebanon after the ceasefire where they continued to carry out those kind of operations. So we will look into the Syria part coming up with Helena, but that is the resistance report for this week.